And back at it again with another video. I'm doing a video today to show the cut and trim of the front fender on the RadRover e-bike. And the reason why I had to cut my front fender is because I purchased a new Kuat NV 2.0 hitch style rack to transport my bicycle. And unfortunately, you can't use a fender with this type of rack. So I had to cut and modify my front fender in order to make it work. And as you can see here, this is the factory fender I purchased from Rad Power Bikes. It's a great fender, but unfortunately for this type of transportation rack, I need to cut it and modify it. And this locking arm needs to be up against the forks. And as you can see, I only have about an inch worth of clearance. So I'm going to show everybody what I did to make this work. So I started out with a 5-pound weight. I liked the curve of it and it actually seemed to work perfectly. So I placed it on top of the fender and drew my nice straight even line all the way across to get that bow. And then I took the Dremel tool out and started to cut. And one thing I did have to make sure was, of course, the bottom bracket here was not in the way, and it wasn't. So plenty of clearance to cut and make this modification. So I found after you make the cut, you switch over to a sanding bit and you sand down all the way down to the line, remove the line that you put on there with your permanent marker. And I use the high speed in order to really grind away at the excess plastic that I needed to remove. And then I slowed up the speed on the sander to the low setting and I just lightly went over it to fine tune the curve that I needed to get. And it actually worked out perfectly. And after the sanding on the low speed, I then got some 150 grit sandpaper, and I used the sandpaper to just smooth everything out, just kind of give it a nice hand touch sand job. That way everything is nice and smooth, nice and even. I could feel with my fingers if anything's uneven, and it actually turned out fantastic. I think for what it is, it's looks great, has the perfect curve to it. Just had to take my time and make it work, and as you can see here, turned out pretty good. And for those of you not familiar with Plasti Dip, I did Plasti Dip my fenders, and that's what I'm ripping off my fenders right here is the first coat of Plasti Dip. I personally like Plasti Dip. In this particular application, it works out great. It's a lot easier to clean. I don't have to worry about the scruff marks on the factory fender, and it just gives it a nice flat black look. So here's the fender without the Plasti Dip. Looks pretty good. Unfortunately, it's super easy to scratch, but as you can see with my sanding job, it turned out perfect. Gave it a quick couple coats of Plasti Dip to give it that nice flat black look to protect it from scratches. Did not do the bottom side, just the top side. But overall, turned out pretty dang good. I'm really impressed with this, really happy with the results that I got. And now we're gonna work on mounting it up. So for my install of the fender, I actually use a spacer nut. The reason why I do this is so the back end of the fender doesn't sag down so low and catch the tire as it rotates. So I simply have just the factory nuts and screws that came with the bike. I have a spacer nut on there, put the fender on, and then I cinch it down with another locking nut with a washer. And that gives me plenty of clearance there for the fender so it doesn't rub on the back end of the front tire. So as you can see here, it turned out pretty good. My only complaint is it does look a little goofy missing the front part of the fender, but overall for this setup it does work. As you can see, I have plenty of clearance here for my rack, and the front end of the fender here shaved down very nicely with that nice curve on the front end, and everything works out just as I intended it to work. So hopefully this helps you out if you do have this style hitch rack, and don't be afraid to cut it up if you need to. Thanks again for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please post up below, and we'll see you next time. Cheers!